Greetings in the name of the Most High Yahuwah and His Son, Yahusha, to the 12 tribes that are scattered abroad. I am Brother Hiram, and I am bringing you a video today which I will entitle, Put Away or Divorce? Clearing Up the Confusion. So there are arguments that are made concerning this subject of put away or divorce. And these arguments are causing confusion, and I'm going to deal with these arguments in this video. I'm going to deal with the main arguments that are made. Now, one argument that is made is put away is not divorce. And while the strict definition of put away may not be divorce, that is a misleading statement, and I will talk more about that later. Now, the Hebrew or Greek words for put away and divorce are two different words. And even though that is a true statement, it's not telling the whole story. And so because of the way that it's told, this is a misleading statement as well. And you will see why later in this video, why I say that it is misleading just to say that they are two different words in the Hebrew and Greek text, but not to say anything else about them. To put a woman away is to send a woman out of your house without a bill of divorce. Now, I have heard this argument put forth that this is the definition of put away, or apalou in the Greek 630 in the Greek section of the Strong's Concordance, that this is the definition, when this is not the definition, as we're going to see in this video, that it can be a definition, but it is not the definition. Also, when Yahusha spoke of putting away in regard to marriage, he only meant putting a woman out of one's house without a bill of divorce. So we're going to see about that, because that's really what's most important here is, we want to answer the million-dollar question, and that is, what did Yahusha teach about this subject? What did he mean when he used the word putting away? What did he teach? What is he saying? That's the bottom line. That's what we want to get to. And finally, the translators erroneously translated the word for putting away as divorce. Well, we're going to see about that. So this is what I wanted us to look at here. This here is Matthew 19, verses 7 through 9, and this is from the Greek Interlinear. You can type that in your Google search bar. You can type Greek Interlinear Matthew 19, and it will pull this up here. I believe this is from Bible Hub or one of those type of sites, Bible Hub, Bible Gateway. But anyway, just through a search, you'll be able to pull this up. Now, this is verses 7 through 9 of Matthew 19, and I have purposefully put boxes around these words here because it's the definition of these words that is called into question. And so what I want to call attention to is the first box here, because in verse 7 it says, they say to him, why then Moses did command to give a roll of divorce. And so here is the Greek word for divorce. It says apostasio. That's 647. And it says apostasio. And that's 647 in your Strong's Concordance. This is the word for divorce. Now, the underlined portion, the reason why I underlined it is because I want you to notice that this word, apostasio, is a noun. It's talking about the bill of divorce, or literally the roll of divorce. It's a noun. And as we go on, and to send her away, or to send away her. And so we see box number 2. And so send away, put away. This is what's called into question here. Okay? Why then Moses did command to give a roll of divorce and to send away her. So the word for send away, it says apolisai, or 630 in the Greek in your Strong's Concordance, which merely means to send away. But what's being called into question here is what is being meant by this word, send away. What is meant? And so as we go on, we're going to see what is meant. Look at verse 8. Verse 8 says, he says to them, Moses, in view of the hardness of heart of you, allowed you to divorce the wives of you. From the beginning, however, not was it this way. This is what verse 8 says, so let's zero in on box number 3 here. Box number 3. Now you notice, just like box number 2, box number 3 is 630 apolisai, and it literally means to send away, but here it's translated as divorce. But once again, look at the difference between this word and then the word for divorce, which is apostasio, 647. This word is a verb. Look at boxes 2 and 3. Look at the underlined portions. This word is a verb, to send away, to put away. Moses, for the hardness of your hearts, allowed you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. But then box 1, bill of divorce, noun. It's a noun, bill of divorce. Now, the reason why I say that is because this is one of the arguments that is made, as I showed you before, that put away is not divorce and it's 2 different words. Well, while it's true that it's 2 different words, they're not telling you why it's 2 different words. They're not telling you that one of the words is a verb and one of the words is a noun. And so the verb is doing what the verb is supposed to do, and the noun is doing what the noun is supposed to do. Both of them have their place in describing the divorce process. In fact, you see where it says to give a roll of divorce and to send away her. That statement includes all 3 stages of the divorce process. Number 1, to issue the roll of divorce, bill of divorce. Number 2, to give it, or to put it in her hands. And number 3, to send her away. These are the 3 stages, the 3 steps of the scriptural divorce process. And so we see that to send away is the final stage of that process. And that is the stage that is the action part of it. That's the icing on the cake. That completes the process to send her away. And so that's why it's 2 different words. It's 2 different tenses. One's a verb and one's a noun. And so to say that put away is not divorce, it's 2 different words that's used. And some say it's 2 completely different words with completely different meanings. And that's very misleading, because what it is in actuality, it's 2 different words, but it's describing the same process, which is the divorce process. So 2 different words, yes, but describing one process, which is divorce. Now, in verse 8, I had already read it. I'm going to read it again. He says to them, Moses, in view of the hardness of heart of you, allowed you to divorce the wives of you. And I'll just stop there. So, question. So if we're going to say that to send away or put away a woman it only means to send a woman out of your house without a divorce certificate, does that definition fit in verse 8 here? Did Moses, because of the hardness of the heart, allow the men to merely put away their wives without a divorce certificate? Is that a true statement? Of course it's not. But is this a true statement? Moses, in view of the hardness of heart of you, allowed you to divorce the wives of you. Is that a true statement? Yes, it is a true statement. So verse 8 here proves that Apolosai, 630 in the Strong's Concordance of the Greek, literally meaning to send away or to put away. It can be used to describe the whole process. Yahusha didn't need to go into it again. He didn't need to talk about a bill of divorce and giving it in her hand and sending her away. All he had to do was say that Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, allowed you to put away your wives. And everybody knew what was meant. So he only used the verb form. He didn't include the noun. He only used the verb, send away, put away. But he meant divorce. And he meant divorce because otherwise it's not a true statement. And so we see here, put away, a clear case of put away being used to describe the whole process of divorce. Now, as we go on, verse 9, I say now to you that whoever shall divorce, that's how they translated it, wife of him except for sexual immorality and shall marry another commits adultery, and he who her that is put away marries commits adultery. So we're looking at boxes 4 and 5 now. And so box 4, where they will say, well, this is erroneous for them to translate it as divorce. It should say put away. And so, yeah, that's fine. I can go with that. Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for sexual immorality, marry another. But the problem is they'll say that, and then they'll go further to say, yeah, and he didn't mean divorce. He only meant to put away without a divorce certificate. All right. If you believe that, then listen to what you're saying. Listen to your own words and ask yourself if it makes sense. Because the clear context of this conversation from verse 3, when the Pharisees came to him and said that can a man put away his wife for every cause? From 3 up to verse 8, the clear context is divorce. This is what the Pharisees meant when they asked Yahusha that question. And so they clarified it. They clarified in verse 7 what they meant in verse 3. Because they said, why then Moses did command to give a roll of divorce and to send her away. See, that's the proper usage of the word apostasio, 647. The proper usage of the word divorce. Because these arguments give the false impression that the word for divorce and the word for send away, they're just interchangeable. Because they say that, well, that's not to send away, apolosai, that's not the right word for divorce. The right word for divorce is apostasio. That gives the false impression that they're interchangeable when they are not. One is a verb, one is a noun. So that's just like in the English language to say that I hill up the ran, or I street down the walk. No, I ran up the hill. I walked down the street. You can't put a verb or a noun supposed to go in a noun or a verb supposed to go. Okay, the noun is divorce. The verb is send away, put away. They both have a function in describing the divorce process. So, if we see that the clear context of verses 7, 8, and 9 is divorce. And you can even include verse 3 and read it all the way through. You see exactly what the Pharisees were asking. You see exactly what they meant because they clarified what they meant in verse 3 in verse 7. They clarified that. They include the whole divorce process when dealing with the word for putting away. So if we see that from verse 3 up to verse 8, they're clearly talking about divorce, then what was Yahusha talking about when he used the word for putting away in verse 9? Really, the question is, did he stay with the context of the conversation, or did he just switch everything up here in verse 9, and now he's only talking about putting away without a bill of divorce? And keep in mind now, it wasn't just the Pharisees he's talking to here, that there was a large crowd listening to him too. What kind of effect would that have had on the crowd? What kind of, do you see the confusion that could have brought in the crowd when the whole conversation is about divorce? We can see that from the context. And then he makes a statement in verse 9 that only pertains to putting away without a divorce certificate. No, Elohim is not the author of confusion. He answered the Pharisees within the same context as they asked him the question. Now, I know I don't have this on here on the screen, but all you have to do is read further, read verses 10 through 12, and look at the astonishment of the disciples, the Talmudim, with this statement that Yahusha made. They said, if this is the way it is with a man and his wife, then it is good not to marry. So this would have been the perfect opportunity for Yahusha to correct them and say, oh, no, you didn't get what I was saying. I only meant to send a woman out of your house without a divorce certificate. I didn't mean divorce. So Yahusha could have easily corrected them, but you know what? He affirmed their words. He said, not everyone can receive this statement. And then he went on talking about eunuchs and being a eunuch for the kingdom. And so they understood Yahusha perfectly. And they understood Yahusha making a statement in verse 9 that was so tight and so strict that they considered it good not to marry rather than run the risk of getting married and put yourself in a situation where you could be in adultery. So all the way through this conversation, from verse 3 to verse 12, is clearly within the context of divorce. Even though it just uses the word for put away by itself on a few occasions here, when you take everything in context, it's clearly talking about putting away as the final stage of the divorce process. Now, let's get back to our arguments. The first argument, where it says that put away is not divorce. Well, from what we saw in this video, that's not altogether a true statement, because put away can be talking about the final stage of the divorce process. In fact, what we saw in Matthew 19, we saw that it is talking about the final stage of the divorce process. So we're going to strike that out. Now, the next argument, the Hebrew Greek words for put away and divorce are two different words. Well, that statement by itself may be true, but it's a misleading statement because you're giving the impression that it's two different words talking about two different functions and they're just not related, when the truth of the matter is it's two different words for a reason. One is a noun and one is a verb. In both the noun, the bill of divorce, the giving of the bill of divorce, the writing out of the bill of divorce, that's the first stage of the divorce process. Putting it in her hand, giving it to her, that's the second stage. And putting her out of the house, putting away, is the third and final stage of the divorce process. So it's two different words, but it's describing two different stages or two different steps of the divorce process. That's what they're not telling you. Okay, they're not telling you that. They're not telling you how closely related, how interdependent these words are. So we're going to strike that out. Now, the next argument, to put a woman away is to send a woman out of your house without a bill of divorce. That's not altogether a true statement, because it can mean that, but more often than not, it does mean sending a woman out of your house with a divorce certificate. So it could be with or without, depending upon the context. But to put a hard definition on it and say that it's to send a woman out of your house without a bill of divorce, that is error, because it doesn't always mean that. So we're going to strike that out. When Yahusha spoke of putting away in the context of marriage, he only meant putting a woman out of one's house without a bill of divorce. Well, we just saw that that's false. We just saw that that is wrong, because we looked at the Greek text, we looked at the usage of the words put away and divorce, and we see why they're different. We see how they serve two different functions, and we also saw that if we're going to hold to that definition of putting away, that the passage just does not make sense. The disciples, the Talmudim, their reaction to Yahusha's statement does not make sense if he was only talking about putting away without a bill of divorce. Even the historic context, which tells us, you could look in the Mishnahs and see what the Pharisees believed and what they taught. That's why Yahusha said, "You have heard that it hath been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a bill of divorce." That's what the Pharisees were teaching. But Yahusha was taking them higher. Remember, he said, "Except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter into the reign of the Shamayim, the kingdom of heaven." And so he was taking them higher than what the Pharisees were teaching them. If you look at each of his teachings in Matthew 5, that is the case. You've heard that it hath been said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." I say unto you, if you look at a woman to lust after her, you committed adultery with her already in your heart. He's taking them higher. But if you just put this definition of putting away without a certificate of divorce and you force that definition into Matthew 5:32, you have a situation where he's not taking them higher than what they're being taught in verse 31. He's just basically keeping them in the same place, where in every other teaching in that chapter, he is bringing them up higher and teaching them a righteousness that exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. So let's strike that out. And the final argument, the translators erroneously translated the word for put away as divorce. So, as we saw in verse 8 in the interlinear Greek, that it's just as simple as asking, all right, so they should have just said put away, and to you that means, to the proponents of this teaching, to you all that means put away without a divorce certificate. What about verse 8 in Matthew 9? What about verse 8? Is it a true statement that Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, allowed you to divorce your wives? If they translate it like that, is that a false translation? Is that an erroneous statement that Moses, for the hardness of your hearts, allowed you to divorce your wives? No, it's not an erroneous statement. That's a true statement. But if you were to say, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, allowed you to put away your wives without a divorce certificate, that is a false statement. That is why the translators, being aware of the context of this conversation, translated that word divorce, translated that word for putting away as divorce, because they realized what was meant by it. So no, that's not an erroneous translation of the word put away, as long as the context supports it. So we're going to strike that argument out as well. And so in conclusion, I want to tell you the truth, and that is, to put a woman away is to send a woman out of one's house with or without a bill of divorce, depending upon the context. That is a true and honest definition of apalu, or put away. It's merely to send a woman out of your house, but it can be with or without a bill of divorce. It all depends upon the context. And finally, I will say that in every case where Yahusha spoke of putting away in regard to marriage, he is referring to the final step of the divorce process. We saw that in Matthew 19. But everywhere else where he's talking about it, if you look at what he's saying and you consider the context of the passage where he's speaking these things, you will see that he is referring, when he says put away, he is referring to the final step of the divorce process. He's not referring to putting a woman out of her house without a divorce certificate. It just does not fit the context. So I give the Father praise for giving me eyes to see and to be able to clear up the confusion. Because I'll tell you what, that clears up the confusion for me. Does it clear up the confusion for you? If it does, then say something in the comments. I want to hear from you. So that is all for now, and with that I will say, Shalom.